Good evening, everybody. My name is Scott Turow. I'm a native Chicagoan and author and trained as a lawyer. Just retired from practice about a year ago and still do a little bit of pro bono work. With me tonight is, I just said this privately, so I'll say it publicly, a truly amazing man, Jarrett Adams. And Jarrett and I have been acquainted for several years now, but we're here to talk about his book, Redeeming Justice. And before we get started, there are a lot of books about wrongful convictions, and a lot of books about, prison memoirs. One thing that distinguishes this book, though, is how beautifully written it is. Jarrett Adams is a real writer, and I trust and pray that this will not be the last book he writes, because he's got an enormous gift. And, anybody who picks up this book will see that very, very quickly. So this is a gripping, heart-rending story, but it's magnificently told. So anyway,
thank you, Scott.
Jarrett, welcome. It's good to see you.
You as well, Scott. You as well. And thank you. And I don't want to interrupt, but I also want to share, a story that we talked about privately. I met Scott. This was the first year law school, and I was able to get a meeting with Scott through, a couple different folks. But one of the folks who mentored me and my wife as well is Honorable Judge Ann Claire Williams, who knew Scott well.
Right.
And, when we sat down, I remember telling you my story and saying what I wanted to do, but I didn't share with you that at that time, if I was an iPhone, my battery was blinking on red. I was tired, Scott. I was trying to keep up. I wanted so desperately to go and get this law degree because my aunts, who were all senior citizens at the time, they were becoming sickly, and I just wanted them to see it. I wanted them to see it because they believed in me for so many years. And when I left with you, we took a picture when we got off the elevator at the end of our lunch, and I was reinvigorated. And so I say that, not to seek any favors. I say that to say this: if anyone is watching this, you would be surprised how much a moment of your time can inspire others to go on, to help in different areas. And for you, Scott, that meeting with me, I was tired, but when I met with you, I knew I was on the right track and what I needed to do. And so I'm so thankful to be here with you again.
Yeah, well, I'm happy to have been there at a down moment for you and having been able to lift you up a little bit. But your persistence and grit and belief in yourself would not have allowed you to falter very long. So I appreciate you saying that, and we should both tip our hat to our mutual friend, Ann Williams, former judge of the United States Court of Appeals for the Seventh Circuit and my former colleague in the U.S. Attorney's Office in Chicago. But, most of what you're going to hear about Jarrett is a tribute to Jarrett. And, so I guess I should ask you to start, before we get into Jarrett's really, as I said, heart-rending but unbelievable story. How do you like the life of being a published author? I know, you thought about this, you were thinking about it when we first met a number of years ago. Yeah. So how did you feel when you first held a copy of your book?
It was really soul snatching is what I would say, because I oftentimes, pick up books to take my mind off of things. When I was incarcerated, my aunt and my grandmother, my mother, and my aunts, they all believed in the power of reading, because my grandmother and my grandfather, they derived from the South, where, you would be lynched for knowing how to read. And so they instilled it in us, the benefit and the knowledge that you can gain from reading. And so I oftentimes pick up books to just take my mind off of different legal matters and stuff like that. And, I would often stop in, this is when bookstores were in, right? Bookstores were the thing. You go to the bookstore, you could be there all day picking through and reading through books. And so to go to Barbara's bookstore, a bookstore that I've went to a lot throughout, my legal law school career while I was in the Gold Coast district, to go through and to see my book on the shelf, it was just so enlightening. It was encouraging. And I oftentimes do not have an opportunity to look at how far I've come, because I'm still in the middle of getting to where God is driving me. And so when I actually saw the book, and I had to fight back tears, Scott, because I couldn't cry in public because I got to keep my street cred, right? But I was nearly in tears when I saw it on the shelves.
Great. Well, I don't know how many of these events you've done, but you should enjoy whatever attention this book brings you, because it's really well deserved. So we both have sort of stepped on the punchline a little bit, because the handsome young practicing lawyer that you were looking at on your screen mentioned, being incarcerated. So why don't you tell us a little bit, because that certainly is what redeeming justice is most about, although I guess at core it's really about you. But tell us what led to your incarceration.
I was 17 years old, just a kid from the South Side. Oftentimes I hear stories of people, who are in neighborhoods and succumb to the streets, and, they turn their lives around. And, Scott, that wasn't my story. I had, grandmother, mom, and aunts who, there was never a time where someone wasn't at the house watching you. And so I had the naive perception that what happens with the horrific stories of the criminal justice system could never touch a person like me, because I'm doing the right thing. I'm telling the truth.
Yeah. Talk a little bit about your mom and your grandmother and your grandfather, who I know was a tremendous influence on you.
Yeah. So as I'm being raised, my mom and my father, they split very early on in my life. And so my mom, in order to compensate, and the reason why I focus so much on this in the book is because I needed to send a shout out, so to speak, to the Black moms who are raising, young Black, kids, and how difficult it is. I don't really think that people can appreciate how difficult it is to just get a young Black male through high school in the inner cities throughout our country. And so I developed this close relationship with my grandma and my grandfather. And it was because my mom was juggling so many things in the air. She would have to get up in the morning at 4:30, get me ready, drop me off at my grandmother's house in order for her to make it out to her job that was past O'Hare Airport. For people who aren't familiar with Chicago, they think when they fly into O'Hare, that's Chicago. That is not the city, okay? That is an hour, if you get caught in traffic, away, okay? So she would take me, drop me off over my grandmother and grandfather's house, and they would just assume the roles of making sure that I got up, making sure that I got to school. And my grandmother, we stayed on a busy street where my grandmother's house was. It was off 95th and King Drive. It was right across the street from the DMV, so it was just traffic. And so my grandmother was always afraid that I would be running, not paying attention, get hit by a car. So she would literally keep me in the kitchen, right, to keep me out of trouble. So as a kid, 9 years old, I could tell you what paprika was, cayenne pepper was, like all you name it, right? Because that's how she kept me busy. So I got older, grandparents passed away, being raised by mom, still going through school, on track to graduate. I ended up graduating from high school, and it was
Where'd
a,
you
it
go?
was-
Where,
I actually attended a couple different high schools, but I actually graduated from Hillcrest High School because it was a move for my mom to make sure that I got through. It just, I can't. The book goes into better details about the strategy that is at play to get your kid out of these neighborhoods to just have a shot at life. And so at the time, it was frustrating because every time you move, you got to make new friends and stuff like that. And it wasn't until I was older, as I am now, that I understand that these weren't moves; these were sacrifices that my mother was making in order for me to have the opportunity that I have now. Graduated high school. It was a very, very odd moment because you look so forward to graduating high school, and then when you graduate, it's like, okay, well, what am I going to do now? I was headed to junior college because I wanted to start there because there was just no money around for me to go to school. So it was towards the end of the summer, when me and a couple of my friends, we would go outside of the city limits to go to parties and different college parties and stuff like that, just simply because nothing ever is good in these neighborhoods, Scott. I mean, with your work in attorney, the U.S. Attorney's Office, and it's so easy for trouble to find you. And so we would oftentimes like just go out, have a party, and chill out, and come back. Well, this particular night, we were going to a party in Whitewater, Wisconsin. It was Wisconsin, and it was a college of Whitewater. One of my friends, he had already graduated the year before, so he was already attending college parties. And as a kid, and you're on the porch and you're just looking at things, and you visualize, everyone, I believe, when they're in high school, visualizes, man, I can't wait to go to college. I can't wait to have fun. I can't wait to just explore. So we took a trip to this party, and we used the classic alibi that I am sure many guests who are viewing this have used. We each told our parents that we would be spending the night over each other's house, and we snuck to a party in Wisconsin that was about an hour and 15 minutes away. We attend this party, and this party, I mean, look, it's a typical college party, right? There is, underage drinking, there is partying, and we were falsely accused after accepting a consensual invitation in a room with a young lady. And
this young woman, she eventually invited you guys back to her room. There was a consensual sexual encounter.
Yes.
And in the middle of it, a roommate runs in.
Yes.
Right, and starts reading out the young woman who invited you back, calling her names because she's having sex on her bed. That was what irritated the roommate. So, and the young woman then goes running out of the room, sort of to redeem herself in the eyes of her roommate. So, and that really is the beginning of what went wrong. So
it is, and if as naive as I was back then, my mother, I could see the worry on her face with the accusation. And I hadn't had any experience with the criminal justice system. I hadn't, any experience other than law and order. And so when, she's worried,
because the number of young men who start out in the neighborhood where Jarrett started out, who both get through high school and have no criminal record when they get to the age of 18, have never been arrested, have never had, active encounters with the police. That's a very small group of people.
It is.
And frankly, any cop really worth his or her salt should have paused at that moment, looking at the kind of young man who was in front of them, and said, this is not an ordinary kid. He's done some really good things, and he didn't get there easily. But anyway, that didn't happen. There were
It
these
didn't.
series.
It didn't happen, and I just kept believing that as long as I told the truth, I would be okay. Scott, I never, we my grandmother that I spoke to you about, she didn't play about two things, right? The police better not show up to her door asking about one of her grandkids, and the school better not call her house asking about studies and why you aren't doing what you need to be in school. So we had all of the right values, being brought up. And so when I was accused and we were going through this, I had the naive belief that as long as you told the truth, the criminal justice system would not get it wrong, because that's what Law and Order depicted.
Yeah, well, being with a lawyer will never hurt you when
Yeah.
somebody wants to come talk to you about your role in a crime. And, lawyers often accompany their clients to go talk to the police and tell them the truth. And I did it plenty when I was practicing law. But, it's just, it's one of many, many parts of Jarrett's story that goes to, indicate the systemic inequalities that that pervade our society and particularly impact our justice system. I guarantee you that if the cops came to talk to my son, I would be out there and I'd hire one of my friends to go with him because and I did it many times as a lawyer. Suburban parents who'd had the police come to the door and said, well, just a second, I want to get my son some representation. But Jarrett didn't have that. He talked to these people, he told the truth, and his reward for that was that he ended up getting charged with criminal sexual assault in Wisconsin. So he was arrested and got to experience Cook County Jail.
I mean, there's nothing humane about Cook County Jail at all, Scott.
I do want to come back and talk to you about the prison system, but let's go ahead with the story right now.
Yeah, it's nothing humane about the Cook County Jail at all. And to your point about me and my youth and going down to the police station, Illinois just passed a law where you are not allowed to lie to juveniles in interrogations in order to obtain favorable statements for police cases. And I remember, Scott, when at the end of this was after the party. I want people, when they get a chance to read the book, they'll know everything in detail. But this wasn't here comes the police, they're arresting everyone on scene. This was literally, a month later. I'm coming home. The summer is ending, and I'm coming home from work, and there's a card in my door for a detective, and it was like robbery homicide. So I called immediately because I knew good and well they couldn't be looking for me for a robbery homicide. So when I called, the officer said
they found you only because one of your friends had lost his wallet.
Yeah,
the night of.
Yeah, and the thing about it was he never lost the wallet. He forgot the wallet on the counter, because at the time it was like a Coach wallet. Back then, kids had these big Coach wallets as teenagers and stuff like that. And so he had, like lighters and stuff like that. So he had left it on a counter, but also I had befriended a student there. So they had my information anyway, because the guy was like, man, you should come up to school here. So we had started talking and socializing. Like, we literally, Scott, were enjoying the party, and the other folks at the party, even though we were the only Black kids who were at this campus party, there was no issues until this incident where this roommate walked in and it just spiraled out of control. But at the same time, I just really felt like things would work out because we weren't doing anything wrong.
So your charges are brought, you're arrested and held in Cook County Jail for extradition to the state of Wisconsin. People should understand there's a legal procedure where you're arrested in one state and facing charges in another. You waived extradition and went up to Wisconsin, and where you ended up on trial. I forgot the name. Is it Jefferson County? Is that what it was?
It was Jefferson County, Wisconsin.
Yeah. So where there probably are not a large number of African Americans. So you go to trial, and one of your friends has got a pretty good lawyer.
Yeah.
Right. And you know, he clearly had more money because he was able to bond out too.
Indeed.
You know, Jarrett is not in that circumstance. His family, much as they love him, can't come close to making this bond, and he can't afford retained counsel. He's got the public defender, and you know, there are many incredibly dedicated people working in our public defenders or federal defenders offices across the United States, and outstanding lawyers. And you know, I remember when I started doing you know, serious crimes at 26th Street, that a lot of people were of the view that if you were facing a murder, you were probably better off with the murder task force in the PD's office than most lawyers in the city of Chicago. But some public defenders are not as inspired. And it's certainly my judgment that the man who represented you fell into that uninspired category.
Indeed.
So,
Indeed, to say the least, he did. And the fork in the road was this, and I think this is important too for folks to understand. So we're all three charged with the same thing, and it's based on nothing but an accusation. And what we would later find out is that, well, there was more than just an accusation. There was actually a statement by a college student that refuted all of the accusations. Like it was nuts. But the police withheld this statement, and we never had it during the trial in which me and one of my co-defendants was convicted. And I will never forget this moment. So we go to a first trial. And as you know, Scott, and as some people may know, when there's a police report written, the accuser is to testify. And so at this first trial, there was no consistency with what was alleged in the police report. It was really outlandish, quite frankly. So the state's attorney stood up and asked to amend the charges at the closing of trial. This was over. All the witnesses that went up, they moved to amend the trial to fourth and third degree. And that is important because that takes the element of like the force, the threat of force, and all of that type of stuff. And so we naturally believed that at this moment, the judge would rule as a mistrial and declare it with prejudice. She did not. And instead allowed the state to come at us again. And this is the conversation. I wake up out of my sleep sometimes thinking about this, because when me and my co-defendant made it back up to trial, we were expecting to see the remaining co-defendant who had the hired counsel, who was really leading the show throughout. We didn't see him. And our attorneys told us to come out in the hall to have a conversation with him. And they said, look, you know, the other attorney moved to have the appellate court rule that you guys shouldn't be recharged because of double jeopardy. We don't necessarily think that will win, so we didn't join in. And I remember asking the question, like, well, wasn't that our choice to decide? And the lawyer's like, well, you know, you see how the first trial went, and you know, we just want to get this done. I mean, you were supposed to be starting school. Don't you want to get out and start school? Now, I'm listening to what this guy says, Scott, but I know this doesn't make sense, even as an 18-year-old now. But I'm looking across at my mother, and my mother is driving 5 hours to come up here and take me up here and come up here and view the trial and back and forth and back and forth. I just wanted it to stop. So I agreed to go forward. It was the worst decision of my life. They never introduced any evidence of our innocence, no impeachment, nothing. And in a day and a half, we were found guilty, and I was sentenced to serve 28 years in prison.
Yeah, the sentence is remarkable. But I want to just emphasize a couple of things that Jarrett said. People ask, how does this happen? And he's said two things in passing. One, we'll not rather being euphemistic. One, bad lawyer. Two, bad police. Jarrett mentioned that there was very significant exculpatory evidence that came from this other college student who basically gave the same version of events that Jarrett would give. And the police hid that. They hid it. And, you know, by the way, just to deal with the stereotypes that may be operating in people's minds, the officer who did it was a female. Mm-hmm. She was a female. So if you think there's somehow, you know, gender makes people better, not necessarily. And so anyway, so you've got evidence hidden. The witness is weak, really weak. She tells this incredible story about leaving the room and then coming back and claims that, you know, she was forced somehow. It's nonsense.
Scott, I was in the movie. I'm literally listening to, for the first time when I went to the police station, I was doing all the talking and didn't know that I should, and basically just saying like, no, this is what happened. It wasn't until we got to the court where we heard this narrative, and I am like, am I in the right courtroom? Like, that was my reaction to this. It was just total, it was unbelievable and outlandish.
Yeah. So here's this remarkable young man who's suddenly sentenced to 28 years in prison. And this is where the transformation of Jarrett Adams begins, because as I will tell your story, he realizes that the person who's got to be the number one advocate for Jarrett Adams is Jarrett Adams. Mm-hmm. And he starts going to the prison law library, and some with the suggestion of a cellmate, but begins reading the law on his own, begins educating himself in the law, and because he's as brilliant as he is, understands what he's reading, without any, special training, and, literally begins his own defense to get himself out. And, it's just all of these wrongful conviction cases, and I've dealt with a number, they always turn on the same kinds of, horrible, just horrible bad breaks, bad lawyer, bad, bad police. I gotta say, bad judge. You got the third defendant is released, and the prosecutors take the position that because Jarrett's lawyer didn't introduce any evidence, the fact that there was this important exculpatory evidence is irrelevant because he didn't introduce any evidence at trial. And which, that's idiotic. If he'd had the exculpatory evidence, he would have pursued a different strategy at trial. Of course he would have introduced it, but the case wouldn't even have started. But anyway, so there he is. He's sentenced to 28 years. I want you to comment on two things. The first is your observation of the prison system and what you have to say about it. People would think, well, Cook County, that's hell, but Wisconsin, that's got to be a little better.
Not at all.
Yeah,
not at all. Well, I'll tell you this, and this isn't just me saying this. This is also Sheriff Dart in Cook County, Sheriff Dart, who's also an alum of my alma mater, Loyola Law School. Cook County Jail isn't just the largest unified jail system in the world, really, because there's no unification like it is in Chicago amongst different places. New York is broken up with boroughs. Cook County Jail isn't just the largest unified jail. It's also one of the largest mental hospitals, so to speak. There are a lot of people in there who do not belong there. They should be getting mental health care treatment. And when you have situations like that, it exasperates the prison experience, and no one could ever become corrected in an atmosphere like that. When you have people who have no hope, it springs forth hopeless acts. So the amount of violence through the Cook County Jail, just the month or so that I was there waiting to be extradited, was just ridiculous. And I'd never seen it before, Scott. I mean, just, someone changes the channel and all of a sudden someone's hit over the head with something. It was something else. And I thought that when I left out of Cook County Jail, I thought, well, at least this will be a lot better. Well, it wasn't. It was just different shapes of the same problems. And Wisconsin, it wasn't so much signifying with gangs, it was separated by race, where you would have the Aryan, you would have, the Latin gangs, the Black gangs. And I realized very early on, through the help of a cellmate, who had a conversation, because the thing with books, I just, even in prison, just reading. And he's like, look, I just don't get you. And I asked him, what does he mean? And I think I need to provide some context for this conversation, because this is an important part in the book and also my journey to going to fight for my freedom. There was a lockdown incident that took place in the prison I was in, and someone was attacked. And usually what happens is when an inmate is attacked or something like that, they will shut down the prison, lock everyone up. They'll do an investigation. They're trying to see if it's a riot or if it's a gang war or whatever it is. And I remember it was one of the nights that I could have access to the phone, and they would bring the phone to your cell. There were cords, they would give people the phone on their phone night. And I remember talking to my mom and my aunts. My mom would patch in my aunts on three-way, and it would be all of us on the call. And I remember them asking the question, just like, we look at cases all the time. We've seen people murder people. How do you get 28 years? And I didn't have an answer. And then they also said, well, how does, your co-defendant, with the lawyer, make a strategy move? He's still out. Why are you guys there? These were all questions, Scott, that I couldn't answer with my limited high school education at the time. And so my cellmate, after overhearing this conversation, he says, look, I don't mean to be in your business, but we are in a room the size of a broom closet. So I'm hearing everything, but I'm confused. And I said, well, what are you confused about? And he says, well, you're on the phone and you're talking about how innocent you are and how you're not guilty and how you need to get out of this. But every day I watch you go out and you play basketball, you lift weights, you play chess. I mean, you act like you're at a country club. If you ask me, you don't act like you're innocent. And I responded to him and said, well, I have an attorney who's working on my appeal. Scott, his response to me was, you had an attorney at your trial, didn't you? Mm-hmm. And it was that moment that I started with the first case that he gave me, Strickland versus Washington.
Which is the base ineffective assistance of counsel case, where the Supreme Court realized that you can be deprived of a fundamental right by having a bad lawyer.
Indeed. Indeed. So, it was a journey, and the book will take you on this journey where I was motivated. I was going through, I was fighting. And then when we found out that the prosecutor's office discovered this statement that was withheld by the police, and they dismissed the charges against our co-defendant, me and my other co-defendant had only been incarcerated for a little over a year. Scott, they could have stopped it. They could have stopped it right there and at the very least given us a new trial. They made us go appeal in order to get the same ruling that the co-defendant got when his charges were dismissed. But it took me almost 10 years to do it.
Yeah. Well, that's anybody who, wants to insight into the way the prison system functions ought to read Redeeming Justice. In my view, you ought to read Redeeming Justice most fundamentally because it's a great book. But the other thing we have to talk about, though, Jarrett, before we're going to open the floor to questions in about 10 minutes, but and you're upfront about this from the beginning. The way you grew up, you knew that African Americans were not treated equally in this country. But the role of race in your case is it's inescapable. If you want to know how, if you're looking at the news and going, I don't understand what these people are complaining about. It's a country, everybody's got equal opportunity. You would not have done a day of time if you were not a Black man. What happened to you was a story repeated in the South, many times where an African American ended up getting lynched because he had consensual sex with a white woman who then got caught and claimed that she'd been forced. And then the Black man's taken out and lynched. I want you to talk about your perspective on that knowing, that a lot of the unfairness being visited on you is being visited on you by a system that just doesn't treat people who look like you fairly.
Yeah, it was well, let me say this. I told you as I started that, I had the naive preconceived notion that things worked out the same way it was depicted on Law and Order. And that just wasn't the case. And, I remember as we were getting ready for the retrial, because remember there was a mistrial.
Right.
I remember my aunts and my godfather and my father had joined as well and taken me up. And, I asked them, I was like, where's my mom? And they're like, she said she couldn't do it. And I'm like, well, what do you mean? So I called my mom, and my mom she says, look, I don't know if we talked to you enough about the story of Emmett Till and things like that. But she was like, I don't think you understand what we see coming ahead. There's nothing fair about what's going on up there, and I can't watch it. And so I had a conversation.
My son's lynching. That's what she said.
That's exactly what she said. She said, I can't watch it. And me believing that things would still work out, and it didn't. And I saw we're accused by a white accuser with three black kids from Chicago. I remember when I made it to the police station and they kept saying, boy, you really want to help yourself here. You want to stay out of trouble. Boy, you wanted this. Boy, you wanted that. When we got to the trial, we were the three black men from Chicago, right? Three black men. It was almost that was our name that was assumed. And for people who do not believe that race plays a huge factor in cases, I am living proof where this case lacked so much evidence and had more evidence of innocence, yet we still were sentenced to 28 years as if we had killed someone. If that isn't, striking, what is?
Well, the conviction really just depended on a sense of affront that, these black men had come up from Chicago and had sex with this white girl. And the sentence was a way to make sure that they didn't keep doing that. This case reeks of racism.
To your point, Scott, I'll tell you this, before we move on to questions. So when we were accused, there were like headlines, 3 black men from Chicago, rape a girl. When people started to learn the truth in a police misconduct, that article was this small, Scott.
No headlines.
My article was literally 3 paragraphs when my conviction was overturned. That was it.
Well, your conviction was overturned, and let's take a few minutes before we go on to questions to talk about your life since then. And bring us up to speed on what you're doing now. But
so right now,
you're an ex-con now. You're released from prison,
right?
And yet, as I say, you sit here, a practicing lawyer. So tell us how yet another remarkable transformation took place.
So the conviction is reversed with the help of the Wisconsin Innocence Project and Keith Finley at the time. And this is, again, after almost 10 years in prison. So the conviction is reversed. The prosecutor files a motion to dismiss all the charges, record expunged. And I remember, Scott, that moment because I kept expecting that we would get the vindication as loud as we got the false accusation. And it didn't happen. In less than 5 minutes, prosecutor stands up. Yeah, we moved to dismiss all the charges with the case. It's old, it's blah, blah, blah. The judge is like, okay, slams the gavel, turns around, proceeding is over with. I remember I couldn't sleep the night before because I just wanted my mom and my aunts to hear that they did raise me the right way. And I turned around, and that same familiar face with those wrinkles and creases of anguish was my mom. And I told her, I said, look, Mom, we're done crying. I'm not crying anymore. We didn't get what we expected, but we got what we needed. And I left out of that courtroom, and less than 30 days, I enrolled in junior college, and my family would not allow me to continue without getting mental health therapy. And I was able to do that. And it was through that I was able to compartmentalize what had happened. And more importantly, that it would not be erased, but I would be able to use the anger and frustration and use it as my fuel to drive me to where I am. So I got up. I remember writing a list of what I wanted to do, and I taped it on the back of my bedroom door. And the reason that I did that is because each day that I got up out of the bed, I wanted to look at that. And I started to cross lines through things. I enrolled in school, cross a line. I'm on my way, to undergrad, cross a line. I need to take the LSAT, cross a line. So it was me working towards this path. And so I was able to fortunately graduate from junior college 2 years after my release. I obtained my bachelor's degree from Roosevelt University downtown. I was employed at the Federal Public Defender's Office as a full-time investigator. That's where I met Judge Ann Claire Williams. That's where I also received the Investigator of the Year award for a clemency that was granted for a client's case that I worked on with an amazing attorney named My Angel Cody. And I also hit the lottery, Scott. I met my wife, through working, alongside Judge Williams with different organizations. I was able to meet my wife. I ended up graduating from law school, and I had the unique opportunity that is not afforded to most law students who look like me. And I had the opportunity to do a judicial fellowship in the Southern District of New York, as well as the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals, the same circuit that overturned my conviction. After that, I went to work for a year and a half at the Innocence Project because, after graduating, I took my degree home and I gave it to that same familiar face, my mom. And so she's tearing up. And I said, Mom, I thought we were done crying. She says, oh, no, I'm not crying because I'm sad. I'm crying because I know that you now have the power to keep another single Black mother from going through what I went through with you and us going through that together. And that motivated me. So I wanted to put a bow on my journey. I worked at the Innocence Project for a year and a half to get the desperate training that I needed. And after working at the Innocence Project, I opened up my first office in New York. And I now have offices in New York, in Milwaukee, and in Chicago. And I'm opening one up out in California next year. So I've been fortunate. I've been blessed. It's been a lot of work. And I feel compelled to now open up about my journey more and more, because in order to affect the system, we have to put more people in the system who are directly impacted. So I wrote the book, and I thank you for your comments on the book and how it was written, because I've read all of the exoneration books, and I wanted to take a different angle, and I wanted to lead with the impact that it has on family, the community, everyone. I may have been incarcerated with bars, but my family was incarcerated minus the bars.
Yeah, no, it's the collateral damage in the prison system. Even, by the way, when the defendant is guilty, is still extraordinary. And so many sad conversations with so many moms. And as I said, even when the defendant is guilty, that doesn't mean the mom is, or anybody else in the family. And very often their family's just like yours, where they did their best. And so it is tragic. But just tell us a little bit more about the work you're doing now.
So now what I'm doing now is we have the law office up and running. And I had the naive notion that with this law degree, I would be able to tackle every issue within the criminal justice system. Through practice and in these gray hairs that you're seeing now, Scott, I've learned that is not one person, one anything that is going to be able to fix the system that desperately needs fixing. So me and my wife and a team of exonerees, along with some wonderful people, have come together, and we've created a nonprofit organization called Life After Justice. And what we're doing is we're literally, as my journey through the prison system, I documented the things that I saw because I wanted to come back and try to tackle them. So Life After Justice is literally, in best words for me, it is an incubating system to create more Jarrett Adams into the system to try to help with reforming and redeeming justice, which is why I named the book Redeeming Justice. So we operate as a mini Innocence Project with the legal department, where we take on cases. I'm doing a case right now in Virginia, Scott. I think people need to look at this case where two men were found not guilty in federal court, but still sentenced to life in prison based on state court guilty pleas, and the evidence of their innocence is rampant. So we're working on cases like that in the nonprofit, because what we're trying to do is this. We want to get people out of the habit of stopping and celebrating when a person gets out. We have to start moving towards creating statutes, legislation that becomes precedent and protects people. This is why it's important. When I was in prison, I got there at 18, turning 19, and I was one of the youngest people that I saw in there, and everyone there was like calling me youngin because I was so young, and they were like, "Well, how are you here so young?" About 3 or 4 years in, Scott, the prison was predominantly people like Jarrett Adams when he first got there, 18 to 22. I didn't realize it, but I was incarcerated in the midst of the mass incarceration boom, where it went from 500,000 to 2.3 million in the blink of about 4 or 5 years. And so we've created this organization because this thing has gotten out of hand to the point where the criminal justice system is eating people up and spitting them out back into the same communities. And these communities can never repair themselves if you are putting men and women in these communities who are ill prepared. So we offer mental health care and therapy. And we also litigate to, again, get the legislation passed. This is about making things right. It's not about picking political sides. And that's why we created the organization. And right now we're taking on all supporters, both by monetary donations, but also with lawyers who have free pro bono time, who want to take on a case or two. We all need to work to leave this earth, leave this nation in the shape that we would want to hand it to our descendants. And in order to do that, we must care first.
Well, let's see. I don't exactly know how the question function works here. I see a little box down at the lower right-hand part of the screen that says ask a question. I don't know if there are questions there. Unanswered
I can
questions.
see.
3.
Yeah, I see 3.
Okay, so the first one says, did you use your original attorney for the appeal? If no, this is the part I like. Have you ever talked to him?
No, look, I did not use him for the appeal. That's definitely not who I used. But when I was going to, I have never been compensated at all, right? And one of the reasons why I was not able to be compensated was because the court, ruled in a way, and it was truthfully, that my lawyer failed to do his duties and pretty much committed malpractice when there was readily available evidence for him to use. So we spoke, and basically that was it. It was more so one of these things of good luck. He had not been practicing long when they assigned him my case. And now, I've heard that he's just doing mediation right now. And people ask me oftentimes, are you mad at him? Are you mad at the young lady who accused you? I'm too busy, Scott, trying to make things right. In terms of, me and my wife are working on a family, and I'm terrified to think of having a young son in today's times right now. So my final act right now is just getting up each and every day, trying to move the needle along in justice.
Okay. Next question here is, this is a good one, I think, because it's certainly curiosity I have. What happened to your other 2 friends?
So Rovan was the co-defendant who received the paid attorney, and me and Rovan talked a lot. We talked. He had never ever mentioned going to the services. After this happened, he immediately went and joined the Army. Like he didn't, like he was, I'm done. I'm joining the Army. And so he had not so great of an experience in the Army. And he's currently out and working, and I'm in contact with his dad, and we speak and stuff like that. And in terms of my remaining co-defendant, it's even more tragic. And you can read in the book, my remaining co-defendant was not as adept as I was in terms of staying on top of filing deadlines and trying to get things filed. He ended up missing a deadline. And as a result, he was granted a release, but the conviction remains. And we're trying right now to get it expunged off of his record. But I will say this. I'm going to point this out. I need to say this because we talked about judges and stuff like that and doing the right thing. To my shock, Scott, when we went through the trial, I do not remember this judge ever looking at me. I just don't. I don't remember she ever looking at me or my 2 co-defendants. When the conviction was sent back down, reversed, and when she used her power to release Dimitri in the interest of justice, she, for the first time, acknowledged on the record, it's obvious that this court did not have all the evidence before it. And as such, is it in the interest of justice that I reverse this conviction? Judge Irwin is no longer is on a bench, but that was a bold move, Scott. And that's what we need more judges to do. You aren't up there to call balls and strikes, because if you think you are, you need to go join the MLB. You're up there as the power that you have to do the right thing with your discretion.
Yeah. Well, as I said, there were a lot of things operating in your case, and you just have to say that racism was one of them.
The biggest one.
The last question that's here, at least that's here now, and I invite people to submit more questions. What needs to be done to change the system?
I want to close with this analogy I've been working on, Scott, and this is what I've been doing. So now that I'm practicing, when I get different jury pools, I have to uniquely reach them with analogies. So I want to use this analogy with what needs to be done in the criminal justice system. I was caught in the airport, and I was reading a book about firefighters and how they operate, right? And so when a fire crew is dispatched, they go out and they know the plan, right? The plan is to put the blaze out as quickly as possible. So what they do is they jump off the truck, they immediately identify the water hose, and they start to form a chain. And that chain feeds the water hose up to the person who is where? Closest to the blaze, because they can see where the water needs to go to control the blaze until they're able to put it out. Now, of course, because of the strength of the fire hydrant, you can stand back where the fire hydrant is and hit the blaze. But to be most effective, it's the person who's in front. And I say that to say this: in order to change this system, we have to start in the communities, mainly the communities of color, who predominantly fill these prison systems up. And what we have to do is stop from our position of at the fire hydrant and directing the water, and feed the water hose up to the people who are in these communities and directly at the front of the blaze, directly impacted by the criminal justice system. That is the only way that we truly change our system. We have to empower and provide the resources for people who are directly impacted by these systems, by these elements in our communities of color that continue to be the conduit to getting Black men of color in these prisons. We have to provide the resources so these communities of color can fix themselves along with our hope, our help, and our guidance. That's how we change the system. And that's what we're doing with this idea of life after justice. We are taking men and women who come back after being directly impacted. We're providing them mental health care, support, so that they can become their own person and advocate in the process of duplication.
Well, we have one more question, and it feeds into that last answer. Person asks, how can I, this is a private citizen, do something to help with getting legislation passed? So that's really a two-part question as far as I'm concerned. One is, what legislation do you think we should be encouraging our various state legislatures to take up to deal more fairly with situations like yours? And second, what can ordinary citizens do to help that come to pass?
Well, the one thing that we need to do is this, Scott. We need to fix the post-conviction statutes across the country. We have a system right now that believes more in finality than they do in justice. And that's exactly what I'm dealing with this case in Virginia, where we have the evidence of their innocence, but the Attorney General's office is basically saying, it's our job to say whether or not you meet the standard, not to decide your innocence or guilt at this point, and you should have brought this 20 years ago. And it makes no sense. And so what we have to do is we have to create these statutes that I believe, in my opinion, I believe in the same fashion that we're able to convene grand juries to indict. We need to be able to convene grand juries to open up cases of actual innocence. We cannot allow the prosecutors who prosecuted the case, who may have believed at the time that the person was guilty. And oftentimes, Scott, you know this from your work and what you've done. Oftentimes, the actors of the wrongful conviction are long gone out of the prosecutor's office and police departments by the time you make it there. But there's still the old adage of finality. We're not going to deal with it. We need to have statutes that create grand jury type people who are jurors to come view and look at evidence and decide whether or not the case should be allowed to be advanced to a stage where innocence can be declared. Because right now, you know, people are spending decades on appeals only to come to the same conclusion that they're innocent. And to specifically answer the question of the citizen who asks, I get this a lot because sometimes people believe that, you know, what am I going to do? I'm just a school teacher. Or what am I going to do? I'm just a janitor, or I'm just a truck driver. What you can do is this: start right in the jurisdiction that you reside in. And I want you to go down to the criminal courthouse on a Monday. And I want you to just watch and observe. You as a citizen, you employ the prosecutors, the state's attorney's offices. Those are your tax dollars. And you deserve transparency. So I think that people need to view what is exactly going on, because oftentimes we just stop at the headlines. If the headline says so-and-so was arrested for whatever it is, our reaction is, well, he must have did it if they said he did it. We have to start to peel back and use our rights, our fundamental constitutional rights as taxpayers, as citizens, people who are in public offices work for us. We have to demand better.
Yeah. Well, on that note, we're going to end, but it's been a remarkable hour. And Jarrett, I thank you most of all for who you are.
Thank you.
And you yourself are an inspiration and a lesson to us all. But for those who aren't privileged to share your company, I do think they can share your words. And I really urge everybody to read Redeeming Justice, because it's not a rant. It's just the facts, man. And again, just beautifully written. You'll enjoy it. So, all right. Godspeed, Jarrett. Thanks for doing this. It's good to be with you always. Take care.
You as well, Scott. Thank you so much, man. I enjoyed this. Thank you.
Bye-bye.